Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Huarca with co-host, teacher, and socialist Andy Lipson and writer and teacher Jessica. We are missing Kenny Cepeda, who is not here with us today. Will be rejoining us next week. And shout out to Kenny, wherever you are, and we'll have him next week with us. We're online at what-s-left.webnode.com, and you can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode wherever you found this episode. Thank you. Right. Just a quick shout out to a few of our listeners / viewers before discussing today's topic. To friends of What's Left, Sandra Nilesh, I want to thank you very much for your support, for your messages, for contacting me. Yesterday, Sandra came by and she heard about my plants, so she brought this plant to get started. She heard that on one of the episodes I had dry plants when I came home from Mexico. Oh. And so I'm very grateful for her. And she brought some lovely wine. So thank you very much, Sandra. She came by. She was in SF, and she also dropped by some stickers that I thought were very cool. And I think we saw them.
Oh yeah.
Maybe I'm not sure if I should say her name if these are the stickers created by her.
I think she's fine. She's gonna be putting those up. She's putting those up around.
Okay. Well, one of our friends created these stickers. So these are also some of the stickers that she gave me, so I can put up on some of the campaigns for COVID vaccines and stuff. I could just put this up. So it's really cool. So I appreciate our friends from What's Left doing that, and it sort of helps me in my recovery of loss of friendships and community here in SF.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so thank you. Oh, and I got a call from, this is whether you want to put this in, I got a call from Brandy about gardening, and she really wants courgettes or zucchini. However, I don't know. Jess here is British, and you deal it with the American here. My native language is Spanish, and I'm Mexican. So whatever zucchini or courgette, it's to be discussed amongst the Brits and the Americans. But she really wants zucchini in the garden, and I'm really grateful she called me, and we're gonna make arrangements so I can go over your house, Andy.
I don't like zucchini.
I like courgette.
But she does eat that, so I guess that would be good to grow. I'd rather grow something we can all enjoy, but we'll see.
Well, you discuss it with her. We got a small list of things to get started.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that we're going to do that. All right. So do you want to introduce the topic, Andy? Why don't you introduce it, since I think it was something you had come up with.
Well, I don't know how many weeks ago it was. It was actually quite some time ago where it was at the end of the episode, and Eduardo, it was when you were away in Mexico, and it was me, Jessica, and Eduardo just kind of talking about future stuff and things we're thinking about. And Jessica mentioned that she's just been having some changes of hearts or thoughts about veganism or her lifestyle. And it was just very interesting to me because we were just all acknowledging just how much has changed, as all these last 2 years has done to change our minds about things. And I was like, I think this would be good to talk about on an episode. And I know the world is going crazy right now, Ukraine, and there's still COVID crazy shit going on, and vaccines are still being talked about. And and Ukraine and nuclear war. But in light of, number one, that Kenny can't be here for something that might require a deeper discussion, and in light of the fact that Jessica's just joining What's Left, which is great, I thought this would be a great opportunity for her to tell us about how she came to some of these important ideas, how they're in flux, where she might think they're going. And I suspect, I already know for a fact that I feel like my ideas have changed. I know, Eduardo, you feel that way. I know Kenny feels that way, and I suspect most of our listeners feel that way. So I just think it'd be useful and really kind of interesting to hear her talk about where she came from in some of these ideas, how she stood for those ideas and how they started to change. So I don't know. That's what I hope we're going to talk about today.
I'm nervous, guys, because this is honestly like I've been kicking around some of these questions in my head for, I don't know, a few months now. And I really haven't had a chance to like hash them out with anybody. So we'll see if I end up talking in circles or whatnot. But I feel like hopefully I'm going to get something out of this conversation too.
And officially, are we talking about this area of veganism and being vegan? Is that, or are we talking about other areas as well?
Yeah, I think that's the centerpiece. But
Okay.
I mean, I'm always wherever it goes, I'm open to it. But
so maybe, and there was a time when you weren't vegan.
Yeah, right? So I was vegan 6 years.
So maybe walk us back
to
the beginning, where before you, like, what made you decide to be vegan, but where were you at before? And then we'll just walk through time then.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'll try to be kind of concise because I feel like, I don't know, everybody's got these long, like, woo, and then I had this, was visited by on high. But yeah, so it was beginning or early 2016, so almost exactly 6 years ago, when I decided to go vegan. Before that, I mean, in terms of diet, like I ate everything. I'm originally from the UK, like you guys mentioned. So I grew up eating sausage rolls, everything, like meat, dairy, everything. And I don't have some, I know for some people it's like I read this book or I listened to this lecture.
Oh, and sorry. And would you say you like those things, like the things, or did you have an inclination? So some people I know.
Yeah, I had I remember even like in college, just sort of, I mean, I don't think I was ever like mean, but I thought, those people are like weirdos. I could never give up cheese. I could never give up sausages. Yeah, I ate all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so I don't have, like, it wasn't, I think for a lot of people, there's like this transformative, like immediate trigger where it just shifts. And it really wasn't that. I don't know. I didn't have something like that. It was more just, I started to kind of, just information started to kind of trickle in, mostly about factory farming. And it was just something I started hearing more about and thinking more about. And I also adopted my dog in 2013, 14, a couple years before this. And I grew up with cats and animals and stuff, but it was the first time I had like my own pet or companion animal. And I think that relationship was also a huge influence. Just, yeah, I mean, she's like my best friend, and we just, we would spend so much time together, like all the time. And yeah, so I decided I was gonna try going vegan. And I think I like decided I was going to try it for 30 days, just eating a completely plant-based diet. And by about day 4, I was like, okay, for life. Because I just have a type of personality where I'll be kind of kicking ideas around like quietly. I'll be reading things, but when I make a decision, I tend to go all in, and I just like dove in, started researching, reading everything I could get my hands on. And I decided, like, I mean, vegan is such an interesting term, and like we can talk about that if you guys want, but it, in terms of like the label, but I mean, there's a million ways to do it. Like, vegan doesn't actually tell you what somebody eats or what they do. It just tells you what they don't eat. Right. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'd heard and knew people who were really, really healthy and had been vegan for years and loved it and had a great experience. And then I'd also heard all these horror stories about, people like destroying people's health and, people giving it up, all sorts of stuff like that. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to do it right. So I initially, I did it because of the sort of ethical stuff, like caring about animals. And then with more and more research, the environmental lens was also a huge factor. But, also just nutritionally, like I was an athlete. I was running a lot of marathons back then. This was like my mid 20s. I remember actually I went vegan like in the middle of training for a race, and I remember like so many of my friends telling me like, don't do that, like that's so risky, like what are you doing, at least wait. And it was fine. I made the decision. I did a lot of research, and I pretty much never looked back. And I, like when I say like I've been vegan for 6 years, like I've been vegan, like like really, like no cheating, like none of that, like never. And then, you know, within, I don't know, a pretty short amount of time, I also became very involved in the animal rights movement. And so it became a huge part of my life in terms of activism, everything from, you know, organizing protests, participating in vigils, going to sanctuaries. And then it also became a part of my research. Like it became a part of my writing and research. I organized events on campus, you know, helped out with student groups, all kinds of stuff. And even like my dissertation for my PhD, it was actually called an applied vegan poetics. So yeah, it's been a huge part of my life for 6 years.
So when I met you, you had a history of being an activist. Was your activism through that route of vegan then animal activism, or had you been earlier?
No, I mean, I used to go to like anti-war protests here and there in college. But yeah, I mean, it was really veganism that kind of catapulted me into that activist world, like properly. And that has been the centerpiece, animal rights activism for the past 6 years. And then environmental activism kind of emerged from that. And that kind of became like almost kind of overtook it. I would say like in the second half of that 3 years, but yeah, it's been like definitely central.
So I am very unfamiliar with, I mean, I know the term veganism, but I remember seeing a show where different vegans were saying that's not vegan, and they were calling each other not vegan, or, you know, like because certain, so there's a kind of a scale it's of sorts. Where would you put yourself, like, as a, because it seemed to have a very fluid definition depending on which vegan you were talking to, kind of thing, because is there a way you can describe your version of it?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and we'll talk about like the representations and like the movement, I guess. But I mean, the Vegan Society, which is kind of like the, I don't know, like the most cited Western definition, is basically avoiding exploitation of animals and cruelty to animals, including diet, including for the purpose of food, clothing, and entertainment, to the degree that is practical and possible. So that's where like the leeway kind of comes in, is like, well, how do you define what's practical and what's possible? You know, if you live in a food desert, or, you know, somebody put something in your meal by accident or something like that. But I mean, I was like pretty full on. I mean, I like to think that I wasn't, I mean, I was a little obnoxious, but I mean, I wasn't the sort of vegan. I mean, there's a sector of the movement who like won't sit down and have a meal with anybody, like if there are animal products on the table. I wasn't like that. I was always down to like talk to people. Yeah. And I mean, part of like, I think part of the criticism of the movement comes from this perception of kind of like a holier than thou, really self-righteous attitude. And I think I never felt like I was better than other people. But if I'm being honest, I guess I did like think that I was making a better choice like in this one area, if that makes sense.
Better choice, not just for you, but for all of us, the planet, kind of thing.
Ethically. Yeah. And I mean, I also should like give the caveat, like, I never at any point thought, oh, I'm going to like save the world by like changing what I have for breakfast. Like, it's a lifestyle change, right? And I mean, that's with so many of these environmental issues and other issues, I think so much, like way too much emphasis has been placed on the public, the working class in terms of lifestyle changes, right? And oftentimes it's a huge distraction from like where the power actually lies. So it's not like I thought, oh, like I'm going to save like all these animals. It was more, I think, just about like aligning my actions with my values. And I mean, after the sort of transition period, it felt great. Like and it still like it feels great. Like I loved it. I mean, there's some negatives to it, but I loved being vegan. Like I felt great. Like, I mean, I've always been kind of an athlete, and I only got faster, stronger, more energetic. I mean, I was healthy before. I ate a lot of fruit and vegetables before, but yeah, it just felt like a really vibrant way to live.
And I'm gonna have one more question, and then Eduardo, I swear I'm gonna hand it over to you. But first, people, you're not just a runner. You've been a fighter. Like, you do Muay Thai, so you need to have like fast twitch muscles and strength at a point, you know. And I remember there was a fighter. Well, he was a UFC guy who was vegan as well. People thought he might not be able to fight because of it, but he's like, no, you can totally fight being vegan. The other thing you mentioned that was interesting is you mentioned the year 2016, and I think everyone's gonna like, you know, that's the whole year that Trump won, and so is there anything about that year that you think might have been the detonator for that transition?
It's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, like the UFC thing, which I think this kind of connects, because Trump was, you know, is a very like macho, you know, sort of like I mean, he's a sexist, like he's a fucking misogynist for real, alleged rapist, right? There's also I think, I mean, I wasn't coming to politics and even just life in general with as much of a feminist framework back then as I am today, but there's also that like gendered aspect of diet, you know, which is why, like, you know, people feminize plant foods, which is one reason why, like, yeah, there's plenty of professional athletes who eat a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet or eat close to it. And there's a really long history of that. There's a great book, which was really, really influential, called The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams. And that was really, really influential to me early on in my activism in terms of understanding sort of just the connections between like different forms of oppression. And that, I mean, that's really what I guess I didn't really say why did I go vegan? I just kind of said like, oh, like the ethics. And I mean, really, I think at base, like it's about seeing animals as sovereign beings in their own right, as opposed to seeing them as commodities or resources, right? And whether it was like connecting it to feminism, connecting it to sustainability, connecting it to anything, right? Like that, I saw a connection between the commodification and exploitation and killing of animals. I should say like non-human animals, because people always forget that we're actually animals too. But that there's a connection there with like other types of subjugation and objectification, women's bodies, like ecosystems in the land, collateral damage in war, all sorts of stuff. And then also just the detachment that I think, especially people like in my generation, you know, I'm like a millennial, and with the increasing, you know, use of technology and, you know, just the whole capitalist structure, right? Like we're very detached, especially people who live in cities, which I up until last year, you know, I've been living in cities my entire adult life. And so I found that veganism kind of brought me toward more of an attachment and a presence with food. Like when I would eat whatever, like a kale salad or something, I would think about like the soil and the sun, and I really came to have like a really deep gratitude for like nourishment, right? And then when I would see a burger, like even though I know it's tasty, it's not like I ever was like, oh, that doesn't taste good. That's not why I made the choice to change. I saw it as a dead body. Like I really did. I mean, I do. So yeah, that's kind of the reason. I didn't answer your question about 2016, but I don't think
you did.
So. I don't know.
Jess, what was that book called? For some reason, as you were saying the book, it got cut off, or it got.
It's called The Sexual Politics of Meat by Carol J. Adams. She's a really, really preeminent ecofeminist. And she actually, the reason I was thinking of her with that question is because she's actually written a lot in the past few years about Trump in particular, and like the whole grab her by the pussy, and just like the language, like the animalistic language, right? Like we use animalistic language as pejorative, right? Especially toward women, like bitch, pussy. There's a long list, cow, all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, it's not
pig.
Just yeah. Toward men as well, but there's a lot more toward women, and Trump has definitely used some of those terms in very public contexts, and she's written a bit about that. I don't know. People sometimes make fun of her, but I think that book especially, I think it's maybe been out like at least several decades, but yeah, it was really influential for me.
Yeah. I think I'll premise my questions or my curiosity of your changes, or what I don't know about you, and with just a little bit about myself. I think just so people understand my lens, because Candy and I have different lenses. I myself am a vegetarian. I was vegan before, and and so I was vegan in my adolescence. But I became vegetarian at age 10. And often it was two things that influenced me. It was a teacher that was a Mexican teacher, a hippie Mexican teacher, I remember, in school. And she just said, when I asked her, what did you eat for the weekend? And she said, well, no, I shared with her, I ate hot dogs. And I thought, do you like hot dogs? And she said, I don't eat what I love. I mean, it was just that simple. And it influenced me, and I thought, oh, that's right. I love animals. I loved animals so much. I had dogs and cats. And so I thought, why would I eat what I love? And it clicked for me. And then there was the film that came out in Mexico, Babe, El Cerdito Valiente, which is about Babe, the pig that was the brave little pig, right? And so those two things influenced me. So that's when I became vegetarian at 10. I think in the beginning, for us who grow up being vegetarian, we have that staunch activity, the want to change everyone, and then over time, over the years, you change how you talk about vegetarianism or veganism. So so today I'm not that judgy, or I'm not that way with some people. I understand when you say you can sit with people and you can eat with them. I myself can do that as well. And I guess where my questions are going to go is because I still believe that being vegetarian and being vegan, which is a challenge when I travel, but being vegetarian is something that's just something that I still believe it could be it aligns with my values. It aligns with change that I believe we can have on this planet, especially whatever you think about climate change, the environmental catastrophe, like, for example, runoffs, like agriculture runoffs that run into rivers, and from animal waste or factory farming. All of these things that affect us in the environment are not about CO2s. They really do a lot of damage to our rainforests. And I think that if people just, the rate that we eat meat and everything, that's something I'm worried about our rainforests and about our land and our water. And so much water is consumed and so much grains are crops are grown for animals. That's my reasons really for doing it. And yes, of course, I have this love for animals. So that's where I just wanted to premise my questions to you with So you are going to change, or you're being vegetarian now, or you are not going to be vegan anymore? I guess that's, I wasn't clear about that. Or you're still in the middle of that, or what is this?
So I have dipped my toe into change. I mean, I broke it a few weeks ago. I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to do moving forward, but I'm having a lot of questions around it. So yeah, in terms of like, what did I actually eat? I was thinking about this and I thought, okay, let me try this. My downstairs neighbor, bless her, came up like a few weeks back with some summer sausage that it was venison meat that her partner had shot, like had hunted. So it was super local. Like I knew the person who had killed the animal. And I was sitting in my fridge as I was kind of, reading some stuff. And I thought, all right, before I go out and like actually try eating animal products again, let me just I had like a little bite just to make sure like the sky wasn't going to fall and I wasn't going to vomit or something. And then, so I bought, a big part of kind of what stimulated me thinking about not being vegan anymore was moving out here to a much more rural place, where I literally I can drive to, a dozen different farms and I can actually meet the animals, meet the farmers. So I reached out to a few different local farmers and I did end up purchasing a few eggs and some local meat. So that was about like a week where I ate a few animal products. I wasn't really sure how I felt about it. My partner, bless him, who's not vegan, has never been vegan, he was like, "What are you doing?" And it was like really weird. I mean, he didn't mean to be like judgy, but like I was like projecting that onto him of like, oh my God, like I feel so judged. Like I feel like this is like so weird. Yeah, it's weird. And then I for like a month after that, I ate completely vegan again. And I was still just kind of like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then the other day I bought some more eggs. So I don't know. I'm like in the process of figuring out what the heck I'm going to do. But I mean, technically I can't call myself vegan anymore. I think. But I wanted to say, Eduardo, I wanted to just say something about like the sustainability aspect of it too, because I just to be clear, not that like the What's Left viewers are going to come for me, but I just want to make it clear, like factory farming should be abolished today. Like those places are hell on earth. Like if there is any place on earth that is hell, that's it. Like they are, I think, probably the cruelest, most sadistic creations that humans have ever manifested. So 100% burn that shit to the ground. I don't plan to eat any of that. I think, industrial agriculture at large, both plant-based and animal-based. And like you mentioned, like, the majority of the soy and the corn and the wheat, like a lot of that's fed to factory farmed animals. And I think industrial agriculture is responsible for, a lot of the exploitation and suffering that occurs, across species today. So I think we have to deindustrialize, if we want a healthy planet for our children and our children's children. But I'm always really intrigued by that phrase you brought up of like, you can't, what do they say? Like you can't eat animals or you can't love animals and eat them too. And I actually, even at my most like intense, vegan moments, I've always kind of had mixed feelings about that phrase. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to separate it. For me, it's hard to separate it from my like feminist critiques, because I think of like men who claim to love women and yet like totally objectify and dominate and consume them, not obviously not literally, well, not usually anyway, but I think a lot of the strategies like by which we commodify women are like in Western culture are the same strategies that we use to commodify nature and animals. But I like if you look at like tribal cultures, not to say that they're like perfect or that they're beyond reproach, but you look at the different ways in which they show such deep respect, right, for hunted animals in particular. I think it's so hard to make a case that they don't love animals. And even in Western culture, I have always said this, that I think hunters and vegans have way more in common with each other than either of those groups have with the sort of mainstream urban population who buys their food in a grocery store and buys like factory farmed meat. So I don't know. I think maybe you can eat animals and love them too. But
yes, to be clear, I think pigs and cows are freaks of human breeding, right? I think those aren't natural animals. Those are things that have been bred over years. I think you said you ate venison, no? And right, that I think that if I had to, I would. I don't do it for spiritual reasons myself, because I feel like there's something I need to have discipline since I left the witness life, and it allows me to. That I can go into that another time. But I don't disagree that there are tribal nations or even people have long time eaten meat, no? And I do think hunting is a lot more maybe ethical. This might be controversial to other vegetarians, but then factory farming. I mean, it's horrible what they do in those places. So I think we've been very cruel to animals. I also don't believe in having pets, because I think pets are also not, it's not natural to be having pets. Myself, I don't do it, but I don't judge it either, right? So it's just hard for me to see birds in cages when I see that. So cats are different, and some dogs are different, but a lot of like fish and birds and reptiles, I think, belong in nature. You know, for me, that's hard to see. So back to your comments. So is this change? What brought about this change recently? Is it something that was propelled by it's like these series of events, the pandemia, or the after effects of it, or is it what is it that maybe propelled it? Whether you decide to eat meat or not eat meat, whatever it is, it's something's propelling, something's there that's giving you a push to begin the curiosity of maybe I can do something else other than what I've been doing.
Yeah. So I guess there's kind of twofold in terms of like questions and critiques. Like one is questions and critiques about being associated with the movement, like with being associated with veganism, like #veganism, animal rights activism, that kind of thing. And then the other half of it is like my actual like actions and practices in my daily life, you know, and my like expression of values. So I don't know. Should I just go over both of them?
Yeah.
So my relationship to like the movement, I have gotten to the point where I feel almost exactly the way that I feel. And I think I've said this in previous episodes. Like, you know how a lot of us kind of feel like with the word leftist or variations of that. Like, I'm fucking sick of saying to people, like, I'm a leftist, but like not that kind of leftist. That's exactly how I feel about saying I'm vegan. Like, I constantly feel an impulse to qualify, like, oh yeah, I'm vegan. Like, I love being vegan, but I'm not like that type of vegan. And I feel like this has been happening for a lot longer, but especially in the 6 years that I was vegan, I've just seen so many freaking issues with the movement that are just beyond frustrating. Everything from rampant like racism and sexism and I'm not saying like every animal rights activist is a racist or a sexist, not at all, but it is a huge problem. Another one is like ineffective activism. Like we just keep doing the same thing and the same thing, and it doesn't change anything. Like every year, more and more animals are killed, like in industrial facilities. And people are just so unwilling to change the strategies, or even to like talk about changing the strategies. So I found that really, really frustrating, like just constantly celebrating the same pointless crap. It's just wasting people's energy. There's the self-righteous, like I mentioned earlier, kind of holier than thou attitudes, and like the purity politics, which, I mean, albeit it's kind of hard to avoid. Like, I mean, I think if you're going to call yourself vegan, like you can't be eating animal products. You can't be like, oh, like I'm vegan, but like, you know, when I travel, or like, I don't know. I mean, that's my opinion. And everybody, I mean, I'm a hypocrite because even though I was like very strict, like I would buy secondhand leather because to me that was less harmful. Like if the point is to try to create less harm in the world, especially toward animals, to me that was much more sustainable and less cruel than buying like new synthetic plastic or whatever, you know, boots or whatever it is. So some people would say like, oh, well, you're complaining about purity politics. But anyway, so constant infighting, I mean, that's a problem in every movement, but it's just another like huge energy suck. And then especially in the COVID era, but I mean, this has been ramping up for a good decade, it's just like cheering on corporate solutions, like fake solutions. Yay, like Burger King has the Impossible Burger, and like celebrating that like it's a freaking victory. It's not. The celebrity culture too, like kind of alongside that corporatism, like the celebrity and influencer culture, it just among like Western veganism is, it's just sickening. I got a long list of complaints. I think also like misrepresentation of data. I mean, that can be a problem on both ends of the spectrum, but you know, I definitely think with some of the statistics that prominent vegan activists like to throw around, like a lot of it is it's not an accurate picture. Like I'm not saying that it's all crap, but some of these like Netflix documentaries that came out, and you know, I was even, you know, like a proponent, like shared some of them. I think a lot of them are really, I don't know, sometimes they're a bit of a reach, and they kind of misrepresent data. And it's like, if you're, you know, there's plenty of data like to back up this stuff without having to stretch it and misrepresent it. Yeah, so there's a few. Oh, and like blinders, like I think it's especially problematic within the vegan movement of just people having such blinders on that they can't think of like any other cause. It's like it has to be about like the animals first and foremost, and nothing else matters. And I mean, yeah, it's all ridiculous, like to me. And if you actually look back, like if you look at the sort of origin of like Western veganism, I mean, there's obviously like non-white, non-Western histories of like abstaining from animal products or cruelty toward animals. There's loads of different examples of that go back like thousands and thousands of years. But if we're talking about sort of like white Western mainstream veganism, it basically goes back to the Vegan Society, which started in the UK, and they were basically a group of peace activists. And it was actually World War II, and seeing the horrors of that, like not just animals, but seeing like what happened to humans, what happened to like landscapes. They were anti-war activists basically. And so I think a lot of that history has been completely lost. People who are like the most prominent voices in mainstream veganism, I don't think hardly any of those people even know like the history of their own movement, which was extremely frustrating. And I mean, I didn't know it at first either, but I just think, I don't know, that's not always the case in other movements. Like anti-war activists read history. And so there was that like human element of like, well, humans are animals too. So, if you're advocating for non-human animals, you should also be advocating for, slaughterhouse workers. You should also be advocating for women. You should, and we can all only do so much, but I do think there's, I don't know, people kind of have blinders on and they don't want to hear other perspectives. They especially don't want to hear perspectives from like small farmers or, herders, hunters and the indigenous thing. Sorry, I'm rambling. I'll make this point and then stop. But the indigenous thing was always a tricky one because it's one of those like gotcha questions that people love to throw at vegans. It's like, oh, like, you're going to criticize like indigenous tribes for like fishing on their tribal lands? And my answer to that was always like, of course not. Like, are you kidding me? Like, let's fucking focus on the problem. And the problem is the factory farms. That's where 99.9% of meat in the United States comes from. It's the cruelest. It's the most environmentally destructive. So like, of course, I'm not going to go like critiquing indigenous people. Like, that's insane. But if you actually want to like look at the logic, the past few years, I really have had an increasingly difficult time reconciling a strict practice of veganism with those traditional practices of living and eating. And, it's not, again, like I don't think it's helpful to like hold up, to participate in that kind of like tokenism of like, whatever, and even, indigenous is that incorporates so many different types of people all over the world. But if we're talking about sort of traditional, non-industrial ways of sustaining a community, I think those indigenous exceptions, which include almost across the board some form of killing and consuming animals, I think those should be the norm, not in the sense of like appropriating other people's culture, but just in the sense of like honoring ancient wisdom of the earth, natural ecosystems and cycles. And I do increasingly think those cycles include life and death, right? And coming to a more rural place, like I've really been forced to be more physically intimate with plant life, like with soil. Like one of the things that made me like go out and like purchase some of these, local animal products was, when I moved out here. So we have a little garden, which is my landlady's garden, but she's going to kind of take me under her wing and hopefully I'll catch up to Eduardo in a few years. I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, what do you do? Like, do you compost? And she was like, well, we bury our compost. And so I was, before the winter hit and the ground froze and it got too hard, I was burying my compost in the garden, and so I was just thinking a lot about soil and like all of the different organisms in soil, right? Like millions of different species, right? And I don't know, you tell me from your like permaculture perspective, Eduardo, like my understanding is that healthy soil requires death. Like it requires like blood and bones and, this whole idea of like pure veganism of like, I'm going to try to live outside of killing. And I think it's not like I was never under the illusion that I was like not, like living completely outside of harm. I just wanted to like, to the extent that I could reduce, unsustainable and unhealthy and unnecessary forms of violence. But I'm not so sure that that's like the way, I think like a package of tofu even like a banana, like in some ways, I think there's more violence and more harm, including harm to animals in those foods, monocrops, soy, wheat, than there is in like a egg that came from down the road.
You've touched on a lot of points, China. That was good. Let's see. Maybe Andy can go first.
I'll just say that it's fairly clear to like that. I can't repeat what you said, but it's fairly clear to me that the transformation that you made was very much, it almost was like, there's a way I heard in it, and I'm speaking almost like poetry, as a rejection of transhumanism, as a rejection of that sort of like, we're going to escape death vision of the world, and an attempt to really embrace and come back to what does it mean for us to be human as an individual, but human as a society, and as part of the world, and a natural part of the world, which again is also, it so resonates with my own evolution in relationship to socialism and the notion of revolution. And it's Diego Rivera versus who was the other, Jose Orozco, and that kind of thing. So you did a very good. For me, I don't know if it is for our audience, but it's entirely clear how that transformation would happen over time. And it's not just the fact that you moved from a urban location to a rural location, which is one of my questions initially. And now I can see that might have been a catalyst for the change, but there was something else taking place in relationship to the way the world is being transformed and what it's forcing us to do. It's kind of stripped down, and I feel like get back to what is, and it's the way you're talking about indigenous. Not like I want to be like that indigenous people, but what were our associations before we got all fucked up with this stuff? And we may have to go back with that because the people in charge plan to take us to a completely different place.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't you speak though to what was positive in both the movement, well, in your experience of the 6 years, but also in the movement? Because even for myself, International Socialist Organization, that I'm so glad I got out of, I do feel there were some things that were important for where I ended up going. So I do think it's important to maybe speak to that, and then Eduardo, you should go.
Oh yeah, I mean the origins of the movement that I was kind of referencing with, the original vegan society. I mean, it was basically like I think it was very like utopian, idealistic, but they wanted a global peace movement based on radical nonviolence after witnessing, the horrors of World War II. And that, I mean, like, yeah, that's what I'm all about. And I think, I mean, one of the questions I'm wrestling with, which I can't quite figure out, is can you consume food, plants, animals, whatever? Can you consume food like without commodifying it? Because I used to think like you have to, even if it's subconsciously, like you have to commodify or objectify an animal in order to consume it. But one of the things that, like I was kind of mentioning earlier with just talking about kind of the gratitude that it brought me, and like, I mean, I always loved to eat before, but it was just such a transformation, like going vegan. I mean, the way that I prepare food, like it's just such a joyful process. Like I love it. Like, and it's just brought me such pleasure and just such a, like just a presence, whatever it is that I'm eating. And I think, there's like there's lots of ways that people love to like make fun of or dismiss vegans. And there might even be people listening who think like whatever, like it's just kind of a silly issue. Like no one gives a fuck what you eat, or like, isn't this a little obsessive? But I think there's some truth to that. Like I said about too much emphasis being placed on like individual lifestyle practices, along with like the guilt projection shaming stuff. Like all of that's true. But to me, like veganism, it has been not just a lifestyle practice, but it's been a whole like spiritual and political like philosophy, and it's kind of unique in the sense that it's an applied philosophy, of which there are other applied philosophies, but there's very few political choices or actions that you take with that level of frequency. People vote or protest or organize, right? But most people eat like 2 or 3 meals a day. And so I think it's kind of unique in that way. And for me, it blew open like my whole world. Like I would not have become an environmental activist. I don't think I would ever have questioned COVID, or at least not to the extent that I would if I hadn't, veganism stimulated me to start researching nutrition and holistic health, not because I was like stoked on it, but because I just wanted to remain healthy and I wanted to do it in a way that wasn't going to harm my body. And what I ended up finding is that I loved learning all of that. And so I've, kind of made a hobby of like studying holistic health for, 5 or so years, I'd say now. So it's brought me that. It's brought me, more health, like myself. Like I said, like I've gotten faster, like lighter, stronger. And it's just brought me like closer, I think, to the land, to animals, and just, yeah, I think I'm more capable of looking at the world around me and not commodifying things, not that like people are looking around like consciously doing that, but like we're all programmed to commodify fucking everything. And so I think, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can eat food. Like I certainly, like if you're growing food, I mean, I ate a few meals before the winter when the garden was still going right as I moved here. And there's just nothing like, eating a meal that's like complete, and I didn't even grow it, my landlady grew it. But it's just a whole different experience. And I think that's something I can take forward, like regardless of if I'm vegan or not vegan. And also people, like I have a lot of critiques of like mainstream veganism, just like I have a lot of critiques of mainstream like progressives. But most of the vegans I know, even if they sometimes are a little obnoxious, which I was definitely that way, they're some of the most compassionate people you will ever meet. Like just so lovely, so full of, I don't know, just like catch me at a vegan pot like any day of the week. Like I love that. I love it. And I've become a much better cook because of it. Yeah. So those are a few things.
So let's see where I can, because I have a few things I just jot down from everything you had said.
You're going to ask me about hypocrisy, weren't you?
I think so. I think I agree with you. There is a line of thinking, and I'm very familiar with it, that I would see in college circles, that there is, especially, you go to college and you'll have these clubs, and especially in liberal cities like SF, which I think is still in the top number 1 city of all of the USA, where there's a lot of vegetarian restaurants and catering to vegetarian lifestyle, and for vegans as well. And there is a level of shaming and wanting to, that obnoxiousness that you talk about, where they don't encourage. It's more of shaming and trying to make people force and sort of ideology. So I am very familiar to it. And so I guess what I'm different for me, I was there at one point when I was younger, and and then traveling to different countries, it just gave me a level of sympathy. I think for me, it isn't that I will never eat meat. I think killing is a form of violence, unnecessary violence. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this. And I think that during what's left, we've talked about guns, and I've changed my view on guns, and I think I'm willing to take up, like, now, whatever the reasons are, people in the Ukraine, family members are taking up, mothers are taking up guns, they're taking up arms, and so have many revolutionaries. And I wonder if I will do that. I'm not sure. And I don't want to own a gun, but I think maybe I might, and if I have to defend or to be a part of the revolution, it's still something I'm questioning. And so I think it has to come to a level of where if I see it necessary, right? And so I think killing animals because I feel deep connection to nature and I feel deep connection to plants, and I think only take what's necessary in nature. I think that's my concept of the way I live. And so it's an unnecessary violence, and I'll only do it if I have to, but I don't condemn it. I don't think it's wrong. I think we overconsume meat. I think, people talk about, well, tribal nations. Yes, but the tribal nations also took it from, they took what they needed, not like, colonizers came here to the USA and killed a bunch of buffalo just for sport, right? And then I think about what you said. I also lived in Idaho for some time, and I remember I had a deep respect for hunters in Idaho because they wouldn't use an AK-47, for example, to kill deer. They thought, why would anyone do that? That's unethical, right? That's not giving another living being like a deer or whatever they were going to hunt a chance. So I think of that, and I do think there's ethics around that. And the same thing I have around drugs and alcohol. I think for the longest time, I did not do those things, right? And I think it's also, it's just what level, I guess, is the discipline of where you think those limits are. And so what are your thoughts on that? I think for spiritual reasons or the violence that this is, because killing, does that have any effect on you? Does that make you, maybe some thoughts on that before I ask another question, because I have another question that comes after that about lifestyle. I'll pause there because I don't want to say too much.
Yeah, I think you and I, Eduardo, maybe have had a similar evolution on the gun issue. I feel like it's probably the most drastic shift I've had on a stance of anything. I was actually thinking about it today because it's St. Patrick's Day today, and I growing up, singing English football songs, no surrender to the IRA, and all of this fucking propaganda that now I look back and I'm like, holy shit, those guys were fucking awesome, right? And they had guns, they had all sorts of makeshift weapons. Do I am I excited about the prospect of going out and shooting an animal? No, but I wonder if part of that is a detachment, right? It's the same reason most people buy their, they pay somebody to do that. You get your chicken nuggets in the grocery store at McDonald's, they don't look anything like the animal. You don't have to deal with that process of killing the animal and then preparing, everything that goes into skinning the animal, all of it, right? It's bloody. It's the opposite of transhumanism, right? Like you said, Andy. And part of with the hypocrisy thing, part of what I'm floundering about is well, fuck, what do I eat? Because if I'm trying to align my which my values haven't really changed, I don't think it's just, I'm taking new information in and I'm trying to adapt, I'm just trying to do my best, be a good person. But wheat, however organic, however, non-GMO, whatever, that shit, soy milk, everything, these monocrops are completely destroying the soil. We're bulldozing whole ecosystems, including all sorts of animals, both mammals and you know, everything right down to bacteria, which people don't really think about or care about, but it is, I mean, it is another, it's kind of another form of like speciesism, you know, which is the whole vegan thing is like, we're not going to be speciesist. And yet we are super speciesist because it's like, well, we're not going to eat farmed animals. We're not going to kill animals to eat them, but we're fine with like bulldozing a whole, you know, forest where millions of animals and billions, like if you count the animals without, you know, faces or the insects. So I don't know. I'm like, well, should I stop eating bagels? Should I not have soy milk? Should I not have organic bananas, which were probably picked under horrible, you know, it's really
unethical labor conditions.
Right. I mean, it's insane. Like, and part of this, right, is like what we always come back to, which is this whole fucking system needs to be torn down. Because you can't make completely ethical choices, not even close. And it's not to say people shouldn't try, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to eat, you know? And I mean, I know, like, I'm really, really excited about the spring coming and learning to garden, you know, even if it's just a little bit. It's obviously there's gonna be a learning curve, and I don't have a massive amount of land. I don't even have my own garden. It's like I said, it's my landlady's, but that is exciting to me. And I think, you know, there's increased desire on the part of people who want to be more self-sustainable, and they want to be more connected and less detached. So I don't know if that answers your question, but kind of.
I will say I have a lot of respect for people who, because my great-grandfather kills his own meat, like he kills his own chickens and he does do it himself. I have a lot of respect for people who do that, and I don't judge it for them. And, you know, Novella Carpenter, who is a writer and someone I've known, she had a small urban farm in Oakland, and she grew and she raised her own pigs and stuff, and she killed it. And, you know, the turkeys would go hang out with the prostitutes right there in downtown. And, you know, it's, you know, this urban farming also is something that just people's willingness to kill their own meat is something I respect. If that's anything, I just want to, there's a difference for me. And maybe as some vegetarian listening to this, like, I'm not a true vegetarian or something.
What do you think about dairy, Eduardo?
I think it's about, I don't drink milk, but I eat yogurt. I eat yogurt because of the probiotics, the importance of your gut, like all of those probiotics that are necessary for your gut. And so I don't eat dairy unless it's cheese is something I'm used to because I go to France a lot and I just love cheese. But not like milk. I don't drink milk like that. Raw milk I will, but that's expensive, so it's when I have money for it.
It's weird because like I feel much more down to eat meat, which is like literal flesh, right? Versus drinking milk. It's just like the whole idea of like consuming another species is like breast milk. When you think about it, it's fucking weird, dude. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's like this reproductive substance that's basically designed specifically right for a mother to nourish her baby. And most non-white populations are quite lactose intolerant, right? Which is why the dietary guidelines, like the governmental
I hate those
federal
guidelines.
dietary guidelines, and even like the school lunch regulations are racist as fuck in this country. They're so fucked up. Like they're making people sick, and disproportionately non-white people. But I give my dog goat's milk all the time because it's great for her stomach. So I don't know, massive fucking hypocrite. I don't know.
There's a great book that I recommend if anyone wants to read this for audience and viewers, Nourishing Traditions, which has to do with a lot of meat, a lot of vegetables. I skip the part on meat because I don't eat meat, but there's a lot of great traditional foods that are there that recipes and all that. It's amazing. How much tribal cultures can teach us from all around the world, from Europe, from Africa, from Latin America, from Asia, that can teach us about what we're missing out on. That I really do think that we could, so take in, like, is fermented foods, right? And a lot of different, vegetables that we're not used to. And so I do have, worked, I love it. I just love it. So I'm not, what I want to say, I don't shame. That's what I'm saying. So I'm not shaming, and I don't mind people's practices. Again, it comes down to how much, I guess, and this was my next question, how do we preserve the earth that we have? And I have said this many times on What's Left. I don't feel motivated. I don't feel I have an incentive to be in a revolution. And you can jump in here too, Andy, because I'm curious from your take. I don't feel motivated to join a revolution, the revolution train, to be a part of anything, of movement, if I'm not fighting for anything. I'm not going to fight for ideas. I want to fight for an earth, and I want to preserve what we have. And at this rate, if the rainforest is not going to be there, if we're losing species, if we're also just damaging our ocean and our waters, to remediate, like to be able to restore and to heal the earth, it's going to take so many years. And for my generations and for my offspring, or my nephew's offspring, because I don't plan to have children as well, I just don't feel motivated. And so that's why I do what I do. And this is where I wanted to ask you, do you think there's any value in people? I know that we should, like, this is what I've said before, to, yes, bring down the system, that obviously the biggest players here, or the biggest gangsters here, have been Nestle, have been all of the corporations that stick and propagandize drink milk, or have big large factory farms, and who are to blame for the environmental destruction. I understand that. But I think that we can do both, which can be responsible, and we can also fight against those institutions, those big companies that have destroyed our planet. And that's what I grapple with when I think people think we should just focus on companies like Nestle. I just don't feel motivated. I just don't see what I'm fighting for. I lose interest. I don't know how, if I'm not doing something to change my life and also be a part of a movement, then I don't feel anything. I get really resigned. That's the word. I get just resigned. I just feel resigned.
Well, I mean, all the processed plant-based alternatives, right? Like, that's a $1 industry, and it's backed by Silicon Valley. It's backed by Green New Deal, corporatists, capitalists, backed by foundations, right? Nonprofit industrial complex. And oh my God, pharma too. Okay. I literally saw the other day, the world's first vegan paracetamol. Like, we've fucking lost the plot. So I totally agree. I mean, the whole hashtag go vegan it's a branding exercise, it's an ad. Like, it's just total virtue signal. It's a fake solution. And in a sense, right, like it's capitalist exploitation and misappropriation of what I think are arguably authentic values. Like, most people are just trying to do good. But no food that's that ultra processed, like plant-based or not, is sustainable or healthy.
Right. And I don't mean to say, and that's good that you brought that up, I don't mean to say that those are the alternatives, because I know those are also screwing our earth.
Yeah.
But that's why I'm a permaculturist, because I do believe that you should grow your own food. You should start growing your own food, and you should connect with other people. I'm connected to community support to agriculture, right? Farm, where I know their practices. I've been on their land, and we exchange, or I buy their food. So it's to me, I understand what I've also heard, the counter argument to what I'm saying about meat and factory farming, and as well as all the industrial runoff of the contamination on our earth. I understand that the counter argument to that is, well, soy burgers aren't necessarily as well the solution to this. And I'm not saying that is as well. It's just doing the best that we can, to minimize the impact that we have on our earth, as we are also fighting these mega companies that are destroying our earth. So I'll stop there because I think my point is clear. I want to hear what both of you have to say to that.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you think, based on your experience with permaculture, do you think it's possible to do completely vegan, including like the fertilizer, permaculture? Because I know like Derek Bros does that, or like argues that you can do that. But I'm like, where do you get your fertilizer? Because if it's synthetic, it's not.
Well, first of all, I don't use synthetic fertilizer. I make my own fertilizer, my own compost, and there's lots of ways in permaculture to create massive amounts of fertilizer to restore the earth. It's not just fertilizer, it's also using plants that have nitrogen roots to be able to restore that earth, and to also grow an ecosystem that can invite animals to restore that earth as well. Like mycelium. Mycelium is also, it's not an animal, but a mycelium is a network of like, it doesn't come from mushrooms, but think of mushrooms as the fruit, and mycelium is this organism that grows underneath our earth. So we can restore the land and restore the soil so that we can have, we don't have to use synthetic fertilizer. Yeah.
But do you need animal manure?
You can use animal manure, but not necessarily so. Yeah, you can. But you can also use human waste, for example, right? Our human waste. That sounds like, for a lot of people, like, oh my God, I don't do that. But there are safe practices to be able to do that. I'll stop there because I think I was talking. So I wanted to get your thought maybe on that. I'm curious on your point of view on that, Andy.
Well, I don't know too much about the actual practices. I think I understand, Jessica, your question of like, well, could it be done without animals? And what I hear you saying, Eduardo, is yes, it could be done. So there's your answer.
It can be done without animals if you have small scale gardening, right? But if you want to create a food forest, right, then other animals in the wild will then fertilize your food forest.
Well, but yeah, I don't think Jessica was saying, "Are you going to end death?" In fact, she's inviting death into the world.
Oh, right.
It's the idea that we would have to use animals in a way that's non-collaborative almost. It's basically, we're going to use you as a tool for us, and I think that's the spirit. I think, Jessica, that you're talking about. I believe. I'm not sure. Am I right about that?
I think so. Yeah.
Well, then I guess here's my question, I suppose, for both of you. So a lot of the depopulation agenda that has been talked about with regards to big pharma and things like that. Here's a question I think that I would have for both of you, actually, in relationship to this change that I think that sounds like we are going to need to make. Is hidden underneath this change we're talking about, is hidden underneath it a depopulation agenda? Should I say more about that?
Are you asking, is like the mainstream #GoVegan part of?
No, I mean the actual kinds of changes that, Jessica, you're looking to make, or Eduardo, that you're looking to make, is underneath these changes on a global scale. If we were to make them, to get rid of factory farming, to get rid of the kinds of things that are exclusively these things as commodities, as opposed to the use values and things that get back to the way things might have been, is hidden underneath that plan, without us saying it, a depopulation agenda. Meaning someone's got to go because there's not going to be enough food for everyone if we're going to go. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah,
I'm asking.
I believe that there is plenty of ways for food for everyone. There are ways. I have said something very controversial before, and I will say it again. I personally, no, I don't know if I want to have this. I personally don't think we should be having any more kids. I'm not planning to have children. I think there are plenty of kids already on our planet that need homes. And I've adopted one. and I did my work for 10 years. And I think everyone else should do the same. Everyone should take on it. And if you don't want any children, that's fine. But if you're planning to have children, you should adopt as well.
What would you say, Jessica?
I totally disagree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I get where your question's coming from, Andy. I do agree with the first part of what Eduardo said, in the sense of, I believe the earth is abundant. I don't think, it's the whole scarcity mindset. Like, we treat the earth respectfully, there is more than enough food, more than enough resources.
I agree.
Call it that.
Yeah.
Realistically, I mean, obviously factory farming is not going to be abolished overnight. And that's even like one of the stupid, like, gotcha things that people will ask vegans is like, well, if we abolish factory farming, like, where do all the animals go? And it's like, but that, like, it's not going to happen like that. But, I'll reference Lear Keith here, who her book, The Vegetarian Myth, is one of the many resources I've been reading, and I haven't even completely finished it, honestly, because it's really hard. Like, after having this as such a big part of my identity for so long, it's really confrontational and it's hard to get through, but I think it's important. I don't agree with her on everything, but anyway, she was a vegan for like 20 years, 30 years or something. So that's even more intense. So yeah, she totally left it. Anyway, I don't agree with all her critiques, but one of the things she frequently talks about, and she's obviously a big, feminist voice as well, is teach a girl to read and you will solve the overpopulation crisis in a generation or two. We don't need to, do the whole eugenics thing. I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings about even the whole charge that the earth is overpopulated. I think the earth is overpopulated with billionaires and Westerner, right? We're consuming way more. But if you look at, some of the most populated places on the planet, India, Africa, to some extent, these people, their carbon footprint is basically zero, like statistically zero. It's ridiculous. Like, it's a total projection. So I don't even agree with that whole, I don't think that's what you were arguing, Andy, but yeah, I don't agree with that.
Yeah. Like, it's a question that comes because,
but yeah, so teach a girl to read, right? Like, if we improve literacy, particularly among women and girls globally, on average, like, just naturally, women will have less children. They will. Like, you don't have to control their reproductive rights. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to take people to gas chambers or feed them propaganda. Like, if people become more literate, women have less children. They just do. I mean, not every single one of them. But yeah, I don't agree with the whole sort of like anti-natalist thing. I want to have children. I'm planning to have children. In my 20s, I was totally on the whole like progressive climate change thing of like, oh, I would love to have a family, but like, it's not ethical. It's not like, I shouldn't bring children into a world that's this horrible, like, and actually the gun issue, funnily enough, was huge because coming from England, I just thought it was so fucking weird that, like, why would I want to have children in a country where someone could walk into like an elementary school? And now I'm like, maybe I should teach my kid to arm the children, right? Arm the animals, arm the children. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really fucked up that we've made like, not we, but I think there's a lot of, and I was actually I've been teaching a feminist theory class this past term, and we talked a little bit about some of the messaging that's coming down to young women. And this whole idea of like, it's not like, it's like a shameful political choice to like breed. There was like a New York Times op-ed that came out not too long ago that was like something about like, it was to breed or not to breed, right? Which is like, it's again, it's like animalistic language to describe women. And I just think like, how fucked up, like to make people, like to make women think that, I don't know, just, you know, like if you want to have a family, you should be able to have a fucking family. I've totally done a 180 over the past decade or so on that issue. Like, I'm like, yeah, let's create good humans. Like, if you want to, I mean,
Brandy and I'm not planning to have kids. I think it's age, but also where we're at. But I very much agree with your view on it, Jessica, in terms of, you know, if you want kids, have kids.
I have the one unpopular, because Kenny also agrees with, but he's already stated his position. To me, there are just a lot of communities that are in need. And to me I have a lot of nephews.
But maybe I'll try to get also at your point, Eduardo, that I don't know if Jessica, you took up, that Eduardo asked about, people talk about Nestle taking on these big corporations and institutions, and counterpose that to these individual choices. And I think, Eduardo, you're saying, one, you reject the counterposing of those two things, and you find that much of the talk of taking those institutions has less meaning to you than the actual personal choice you're making about the way you're living your own life. That's kind of how I heard that, if I've translated it properly.
Can I read a quote?
Go ahead.
Okay, this is a quote from Derek Jensen, and I feel like it speaks to your kind of what you said on that note about the revolution and how
Eduardo, right?
Eduardo, yeah, and then what you just kind of referenced, Andy. But yeah, like that idea that Eduardo was talking about not always feeling like, yeah, I want to join this revolution, and like unless there's something to defend. Like it's easy. I don't know. I'm very like, like let's fight. When the harder thing is like to build the society you want, right? And we obviously have to do both. But anyway, I love this quote. So it's from Derek Jensen. He says, if your experience is that your food comes from the grocery store and your water from the tap, from the economic system, from the social system we call civilization, it is to this you will pledge back your life. If your experience is that food and water come from your land base, you will make and keep promises to your land base in exchange for this food. You will be responsible to the community that supplies you with food and water. You will defend this community to your very death. I think that's so true. It's like, if there's nothing to defend, whether it's like small personal choices or it's whole communities, then there's no point, right? And that's like why you see, so many indigenous individuals and whole groups of people who literally have been willing to literally die, right? Like defending their land, because they don't see their land the way that a lot of us see our land, as a commodity or a resource, or even like a hobby, like, yeah, I can go hiking on Saturday, like get my dose of nature. No, it's like life sustaining. So there's a whole like paradigm shift that's required, I think.
It's for those very same reasons that I think I love the earth, and I love my relationships with people that are on this earth, and which is why I do what I do, and I grow food and try to create community with my neighbors around that, and I think that also living my life as lightly as possible. So I don't know. It's just, I know that I'd also think that there are certain economic freedoms, how do you say it, to be able to think that way, to the space in your head. Like if you are also from a middle class, depending on where you are, if you're a working class family, you're not going to think about where your food comes from. You're going to think about putting food on the table. So I also think that that's important, and I understand that. When I was traveling down Central America, lots of people offered me their food, and it was with meat. And I didn't say, "Oh, I don't eat that." I accepted their food and I ate what I could, right? There are people who are very generous, and to me, that's very important. So I'm not also this, purist. I think that it's important to understand where you're at, right? And I think that if you can be conscientious, then that's great if you can. But there are Buddhists who also take their bowls down a road, and whatever people can offer them is what they offer them. So
I think that's really beautiful, Eduardo, like that example. And I had before I was vegan, I studied abroad in West Africa, and it was like just on my 15-minute walk from my host family's, the house I was living in, to school every day. I would walk it, and half a dozen families would invite me in for breakfast, to share at their communal plate. And yeah, I think people kind of with the detachment thing, food is really fucking important. I think it's easy to trivialize it and be, again, the whatever, just eat what you want. Don't take yourself so seriously. But food is your fuel, yes, nutritionally, but I also think spiritually. I mean, it's all energy, right? And that's why it's so important to me. What could be more important than the type of energy you want to take into your one and only body? But I think, when something is shared, and I'm somebody who I try to buy organic, non-GMO. I'm trying, my biggest thing right now is just trying to shop as locally as possible. But I also think there's an energetic element to it, which is why when somebody makes something with love and care, right? I believe that the body has an ability to kind of transmute and even just, in general, the body can detoxify an incredible amount of stuff, right? I'm not saying we should all be eating McDonald's, but yeah, I think there's something important about that, spiritual or communal energy that goes into it, as well as the actual substance itself.
Yeah, I guess though this is where me and Eduardo have had arguments, I guess, because it's not just getting on the socialism train when it starts running, or rather, that's the way it's often been put here. But for me, I just keep coming back to the truckers in Canada, fossil fuels, trucks. I don't think we're talking about what people would say are the cleanest things, or I don't know what they were eating. Government said some of them had arms, but I don't think they were that armed. But it probably was, for me, it was the most significant event of all this. That wasn't related to India because it was farther away, but the most significant Western event in relationship to what has been a press of big pharma and the state and COVID repression that has been sweeping the globe from the corporations, institutions that benefit from it. There wasn't, I could make a single choice at my school and things like that. Cool, excellent, great. But I don't confuse that for change, which is collective. And it requires a bunch of us to do something. And it won't happen without that. So I do suspect that if there is a collective, for me, that's what it comes down to. It's either we are going to have a collective struggle, or we will find our own path. Even me and Brandy find our own path together, and then the nukes take the whole thing out anyway. That's how this is going to go. And it's becoming more clear to me that 5, 10, 15, 20 years, if we don't take on this competitive system, it's going to end in a blaze. Not that humans won't be able to live on it, but we can take out the idea that a lot of the things we're talking about in terms of healthy living are kind of going to be very difficult to be done under the circumstances where Putin's not going to lose, the chairman of China is not going to lose, and nobody from the United States is ever going to lose. So they're all going to be in the war, and none of them are willing to lose. So that just means they have to go down with the ship. And that's the reason why that Federalist guy who wrote for the Federalist and did all that wargaming with the NATO people, or they were wargaming NATO. Each time it came up, you lost $1 billion, because the notion was no ruler goes down with nukes without using them if they have no other choice but to do it. So for me, I don't think we're talking about, generations or anything like that. I do feel like we're talking about this generation, and we'll either do it or we won't. And if we don't, I don't think there is a future. So there is no solo road that leads us out of this trap that we're being herded into. There's only a collective way out of it. It is only, in my opinion, the working class that can do it, that can lead it and take on the forces, the raid against them. And that's what was so meaningful for me about, because I imagine right now what a similar convoy in the United States would do if they were encircling Washington, D.C. while they're trying to do this bullshit in Ukraine. That would be pretty interesting to me. I know they'd have to get kicked. I mean, the National Guard would definitely be brought in. And of course, their assets would be frozen. But that's also a question of will as well, and of support that those people might have. And if there was broader support, and if there was more willingness of more of us to engage and support that struggle in whatever way we could, it does, then for me, the notion of the possibility of changing things and changing our relationship to each other, but also to the land, then I think it's in play. And not just a situation where one person figures it out. Although I do think, Eduardo, the kinds of things you've learned could very well be really, and other people have learned, could be really helpful to the kind of society, if we get the chance to have a choice that's outside of profit. I think it could be really decisive in terms of what that future might look for. Like look how it might look for people like yourself who've done this kind of studying, because I do think it's important.
Do you mean about, for example, my study on permaculture, right? Permaculture means permanent culture, sustainable ways for us to live with the land.
So, and I don't think people would have a problem, making manure from their own poop. if they knew that they were part of it. It's a
solution.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's that or the smart toilet.
Yeah, yes. And that's coming too, man. And they've already talked about how they're trying to measure COVID levels by looking at the sewage. Mm-hmm. So that's weird, Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that go ahead, Eduardo.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing I was just thinking about, in terms of collective struggle and the fight, in this kind of new normal era. I mean, we have a lot of people on our side, but I still think we're going to need a lot more, a lot more. And I'm just thinking about, all of the people that took the injections, or that cheered stuff on. And one of the things, to connect this to our discussion of veganism, one of the things that's really hard about this decision for me personally is kind of having the humility to admit, hey, I was trying my best all this time, but maybe I didn't have it quite right, or maybe it was right for me at that time, but now it's not. Mm-hmm. And I believe that veganism was for me an integral part of the process of what indigenous scholars would call decolonizing the mind, right? And now I believe that questioning it and perhaps leaving it all together is part of that process too. And there's a part of me that's I'm listening to myself. I'm probably going to watch this episode back and listen to myself and think maybe I'm just fucking tired of fighting and I'm looking for excuses. But I really don't think that's the case. Yeah. One, because I love being vegan. I have loved it despite all the bullshit. I loved it. But also it's easy at this point for me to be vegan. Maybe not for everybody, especially at this start, but logistically and philosophically, it's way it's the easier choice, right? And I think what I'm realizing is that probably reflects a degree of black and white thinking, right? Like what I'm trying to wrestle with, some of these questions are like way harder, you know? And I think I just hope, you know, that other people like in other areas are wrestling with questions of their own and are gonna be willing at some point to say like, yeah, maybe I was wrong on whether it's the vaccines or the convoy or the censorship or whatever, right? And I'm not saying like don't hold them accountable, but yeah, I think we're like just collectively, especially in the US, like this past 6 years, I guess, we're just increasingly like every time we're challenged, we like double down. When really I think we need to be asking ourselves harder questions, even if we don't, you know, even if the answers aren't easy or maybe like aren't even clear yet.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And Eduardo, I'm going to have one exercise for us because I want to see what your thoughts. I'm going to ask you a question, Eduardo. What was the most interesting thing you heard Jessica say out of this? Because for me, it was when you said that. I mean, there's been a lot of good stuff, but what's one thing I didn't know that struck me was when you said you're one of those people who like studies, percolates, thinks about something, and then boom, you shift, and then you make a move, and then that's what you are. Like you're doing that. You know, that's how I heard you describe, and that's very much how I think of what I do as well. It's how I've approached politics. It's how I've approached work. It's how I approach my life in many of the things. It's how I've approached when I was doing jujitsu or the decision to do those sorts of things. It's like, it's how I think of fighting or competing in fighting is like, boom, now go, you know, not to win, not to lose, but you just do. You have to make a choice. And it, for me, it requires a certain level of discipline and a certain level of like, I will do this and I'm going to see this through because this is what I believe. And so here I go. So that struck me when you described yourself that way, because that's how I see myself in terms of how I've been able to make certain decisions. So I didn't know that about you, but that's why I don't think this is like, I'm not even questioning that this is some sort of like, oh, you're fatigued or da-da-da-da. I think it's another one of those moments where something's been percolating and you're going to make another move.
Do people get frustrated at you, Andy, though, when you make that move and then they're like, you've changed overnight? And I'm like, fuck you, I've been reading, I've been studying, I've been losing sleep. Like, it's not visible to the outside.
Well, I just think people, no, I haven't faced that. What I've faced more is a notion of a sense of like, okay, now you've made your mind, you're not going to change your mind. There's no point in talking to you.
Yeah.
But I also agree with that thing you said at the end, though, about I am absorbing what I hope is more fluidity to make a move into a direction and saying, I think I believe this, but to also have some error bars in that thing or like some real latitude to try to move a little bit. So I think I'm becoming more mature in that way. In the way you described at the end, you know, because I that thing you said about yourself in the beginning really struck me.
I think I'm not sure about what struck me or what I think what stood out for me in this discussion was something that we have been exploring here on What's Left, which is to have conversations openly so that other people see that we're just as they are, and it requires a certain level of humility to accept that we change our values, our ethics, our principles, our politics, our selves over time. You know, I think it's cringy listening back to myself from What's Left back when we started, but was it 2018, Andy?
Yeah, it was a while ago, 4 years.
Mm-hmm. And then listening to current What's Left episodes of myself. So in the same realm, Jess, you might feel, I think your word was, I don't know what you said, like it takes certain humility, but you said it maybe uncomfortable. I'm not, how would you describe it? It's kind of, it's challenging to be recorded, to be in these episodes and to sort of change those things in front of people, no? Some people do that privately. A lot of people do that privately. But we're doing it, as maybe Andy's term, to borrow from his phrase, the fishbowl, right? We're doing it in front of others. And maybe some student, some person who knows you might see this and it's like, I remember when she was being obnoxious, 5 years ago or 4 years ago. And look at her now. She's eating venison and eating sausage from her neighbor, and that's hard. I think it's hard for people, or for me, I'll speak for myself, but I like what you said, humility. It's hard when you're changing over time and you're doing it openly and publicly. It is a certain quality and to do it. And we are exposing ourselves here. We're doing it in front of people. I don't like it. I've edited less over the years. And I still, even looking back at those heavily edited videos of myself, I still feel like, I hated them, and I hate watching them. But I appreciate you taking the courage, right, to delve into the unknown uncomfortability of this. When we started this, you said, I don't even know where I asked you a direct question. I said, so are you going to stop being vegan or not? And you said, I don't know. maybe not. You're still grappling with that. And you might just decide, I'm just going to have meat, So I appreciate that, Jess, that you bring that to the table, that you bring your full self, your authentic self. And, it encourages me to continue doing so. So that's what stood out for me.
Well, thank you. From my perspective, I really appreciate you both just making space to have this conversation, because I think a lot of people aren't willing to, like, whether it's this or someone else, it's like, oh, you're a hypocrite, or shut up, or you're wrong, or you're right, or whatever. Like, and yeah, I mean, I don't know what's right and what's wrong. I'm just trying to do my best, and I don't want to sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but I think you kind of just have to go through these processes, right, to get to wherever you're going, and then to the next thing. So I really appreciate both of you making space and just being supportive. I'm scared for my vegan friends to listen to this. So.
I can see that. I can see that. That part, I mean, like, we're gonna get some. If we get some hate on YouTube, that'll be interesting.
Yeah.
The vegan crowd comes out and attacks you. I'll try to defend as best I can.
Can I make a comment? That's what, and I like to come back to our original intention of What's Left. You said earlier that it was difficult for you to say that you're a leftist, or not. What you said, so what does that ever mean? There are so many layers to who we are. It's so complex that people, both right and left, do it. But I think we've identified here, maybe you might agree with this or not, that the left does it more. This high moral stance, this purist way of thinking, this is how you should do these things, right? And there isn't any nuance or any sort of change or maybe even difference of thought, because once you stray, you're cut off, as we have seen with this COVID. And so, I think this is what this is. The essence of What's Left is to have difficult discussions so that we are able to not censor or, what's the other word? Block, or not, what is the word?
Cancel.
Cancel. Thank you. We did an episode on that. Cancel people out.
Yeah. And I think you'll, I know that at times you were wondering if you were rambling, but honestly, I feel like when you go back and listen to the episode, it's very not very, it's clear in its entirety what you're describing. So I think you did a really good job, because now I think I understand better the change you're making. Whether or not you choose to actually go back to eating meat, I think I understand better, and how it's very much connected to things that are changing in my mind about how I think about how we're going to make global change and what that might look like.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for doing this, Jessica.
Thank you.
Next week, back to Ukraine, guys, I promise.
Yes, everyone. Yeah, we're definitely, we're going to be back. I think we have some interesting stuff in mind for next week.
That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webnode.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast channel there and connect with us. If you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Stitcher, Google Play, Bitchute, Odyssey, YouTube, or Telegram. And you can find all of that, again, on the episode notes or on our website. All right. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host Jessica and Andy Lipson. Thank you all very much. We'll see you all next time. Ciao.